So this is part two of the pendulum. We're going to make a almost realistic rotational axis here uh, with a lever and some type of stationary hinge. So this is our goal, hopefully by the next 3 or 4 minutes. So I'm going to start with File, New, General, don't save. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create the lever and we're going to put a cylinder on top. So I'm going to stretch this out a little bit, maybe resize it, stretch it out. Good. And we're going to put the cylinder on top. I always have trouble with the camera and the light getting in the way, so we're just going to delete those, and we can always add those back later. I'm going to move myself over a little bit here. So we're going to, excuse me, I'm going to insert a cylinder, and Shift A, mesh, cylinder, and I'm going to take the number of vertices down to 24, just so Blender works a little bit better. I'm going to rotate this in the Y direction 90 degrees, and this will be, whoa, that's big. What I want to do is actually stretch it out in one direction. So here we have our two objects, and I'm going to move this in a little bit here. Okay, so what's going to happen is we're going to put two donuts on the edge of this, and we're going to rotate this object. So right now we have two different objects, and what I like to do is select both, and a Control J will join those. Control J is join, and this is called a pendulum. Boom. So now we're going to add two donuts, which are torus, and I'm going to take the major segments down to 24 just so Blender doesn't work so hard and still looks round. And I'm going to rotate that in the Y direction 90 degrees. I'm going to try that again. I'm going to R, Y, 90. Boom. And I'm going to see if I can slide that up there, right about there. Maybe look at it from front view. Looks good. And I may have to resize this so it just barely touches. I'm going to resize it a little bit more. Just barely touches the decimal, is, by the way, is the way to center it. And it looks like it just barely touches. Boom. All right. Go up a little bit. Perfect. Yep. So I got maybe a little bit of space in there. Not enough to really for it to matter. So what I want to do next is, once I have this in place, Shift D, X, I'm going to slide it over. And these are two objects. Shift D means duplicate. Shift D, X would send it over. These are two different objects. Control J is join those two objects. So this is going to be my pivot. So the next thing is we want to add an empty, and empty with arrows. Resize that. And in the previous video, you should know that the axis of rotation is going to be the Z axis. So what I need to do here is rotate around the Y axis 90 degrees, and then I have the Z axis being my rotation. So once you have everything in place, time for physics. So what we want to do here is this pendulum. So I'm going to add physics, rigid body, and because this is such an odd shape, we definitely want to use a mesh. And then our pivot, rigid body, because these are hold, we definitely want to use a mesh, and we want to remember to turn off the dynamic. So it's going to be static, which means it's going to be stationary. The last thing we would do here is click on the empty, rigid body constraint, and we're going to be using a hinge. And the first object is always going to be what's rotating. I thought I could click on that. I guess I can't. Oh, there it is. I can eyedrop and click on that. And the second object is going to be what is static. So rotation and pivot. And I think that's about it. So if I play this, oh, nothing happens. The reason why nothing happens is this is perfectly straight up and down. There's no gravity affecting this. So what I like to do is possibly add a plane. I'm going to resize that plane. I'm going to have a ball roll off of this plane. Oh, it looks like I want to rotate it on the x-axis ever so slightly. And I'm going to use a rigid body. I'm going to make this passive. Whoop. And I'm going to add again a ball. And boom. And rigid body. I'm going to change the weight of that ball so it has a little bit more force. So when I drop this, it rolls and it should smack. I missed. All right, I'm just going to resize this a little bit. Try this again. Possibly move the ball a little higher up so it has a little bit more oomph. And so now you see this rotation. Beautiful. Now, some issues are that at frame 250, this ends, and it keeps on rotating. So if I would play this, I change the end of the 500. You notice that this is going to now go 500 frames. Oh, it didn't. It stopped at 250. So the reason why it stopped at 250 is Blender stops all physics by default at 250 to change the physics cache. We want to actually have it last longer, so we go to our scene and we change our cache to as long as we want physics to keep working. So now this is 500, this is 1,000. I could probably change it back to 500 so it's the same. That way I don't crash Blender. So we have a nice looking rotation hinge. So again, if we want to use mesh, we have a pivot, we have the pendulum, and then the big thing here is when we work with rigid body constraint, we change the hinge. We have what's swinging and what's stationary. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have questions. Bye.